Welcome to Account Management Secrets, where we give you weekly strategies and insights that drive successful client relationships. In today's episode, we cover a critical topic that every manager needs to master: earning the right to sell. I'm sitting down with Jan Young, an expert in customer success and post-sale strategies, to explore what it really means to earn the trust of your clients before presenting that upsell, cross-sell, or renewal proposal. She and I discussed the delicate tension between meeting sales targets and building genuine, long-lasting customer relationships. Jan shares her insights on understanding your customers' evolving needs, the importance of a strategic mindset, and how to navigate the complex dynamics between different stakeholders. Plus, she shares why a disciplined approach to account management can make all the difference between a successful renewal and a lost client. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with Jan Young. Hey, Jan, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be here, Alex.
So I want to dig into a very important topic, which is how we as account managers who are working all the time with our customers, and we are always trying to fight fires for them and solve problems with them and so on. So we're all very dedicated to our customers. But what I want to talk about today is the selling side, and specifically how we earn the right to sell to our customers. Like what has to happen there, the skills we might need, the mindsets that we might need, any preconditions that have to exist to earn that right to sell. So to go to them with a upsell proposal, a cross-sell proposal, a renewal proposal, those are all part of what I think about as the right to sell. And anything that we know for sure will just take that right away or ruin our potential with the customer. So I'd love to get into that. And I tend to just jump into the deep end of the pool, if you will. So let's start there. When you think about earning the right to sell for an account manager, what does that mean to you? How do they balance all the pressures that are around them to meet their targets and to build relationships with their customers? And how can we start to think about this challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know how passionate I am about this topic, so I'm very
Yes.
excited to dig in with you and just straight to the deep end of the pool. Let's go. Um, it's when I think about these things, and I'm thinking about from my own experience, but I'm also thinking about from what I've seen in companies when I've done consulting and coaching and that sort of thing as well, right? So from my own experience, I came into tech through like project management and then did some marketing, which I really wanted to just get away from. But I do appreciate a marketing. I just didn't want to do it myself. But then I got into sales, right? And from the very beginning, when got into sales, I was thinking about that customer through the whole life cycle. And so it wasn't just the hunting aspect, but it was sort of like also that farming aspect. And because of that, I think I always connected how to grow the account with how the customer was growing. And I think that is a little bit different in terms of hunting, although you do need to have an eye towards that to be successful as a hunter salesperson, because you do need to think about how your product is actually going to connect and work for them. But ultimately, in the sales motion for that initial sale, you're really only concerned with, does the promise of your product connect with the customer, right? Whereas when you are there with the customer ever forward and you're not getting rid of them, right? Like they are yours. Like you can't just be sort of one and done, promise and then walk away. You have to stay with them, and whatever you're selling to them has to be something that actually will serve them, will help them achieve their business goals. And so then part of that then depends upon how they have experienced working with your product to date. And so there are things that you don't have under your control as an account manager, but you still need to know, did it work? Is it working for them? How did they onboard? Did they onboard in a timely way, or did it take up so much of the contract time? And I was in a situation where I was in multi-year deals. But if you're, in a 1 year deal or monthly deals, thinking about how much time it takes for them to onboard, to start adopting the product, to start feeling more comfortable with it, actually using it to the point where then they optimize. And when you think about these different stages that the customer is going through and how successful they are in using the product, you need to know that, because otherwise you walk into, say, a renewal conversation which is a sales conversation. And if it took, let's say you're in an annual deal and it took them 6 months just to onboard, you're walking into a situation where they want money back. Or if you upsold them on a product that then they were never really onboarding and using, the next time you meet with them, they're going to say, no, I don't want to buy that product again, and I want my money back. So you need to know if you're in that conversation or not, and have you earned that right then to have that sales conversation with them, because all of those other things need to happen in order for the sale to happen, when you get into that next conversation the next time around.
Well, to me, the distinction that you're bringing up here is how much information does the buyer slash customer have? And when we're selling to them the first
Oh,
time,
that's true.
they don't have that much information, right? They're relying on the sales process and the promises that are in the product or the brand or the service. They're relying on, like, okay, I can sort of see how this is going to fit into my future and so on. So they don't have all that much information at the end of the day. However, once we get into the account management role of, okay, this is going to be a renewal or an upsell or a cross sell, at that point they have anywhere from a few months to a year or more of experience. They have a lot more information, and they now understand the pros and cons of our product or service, how they like to work with us, and maybe their needs have even evolved as well, right?
Well, it's interesting when you said that, where I went with what you were first talking about, the information they have. Sometimes who you're talking to, there can be a variety of stakeholders and end users as well, right? And influencers. And so it could be that who you're talking to renew the deal or expand the deal at different points in time, how much do they really know? Because sometimes the executive buyer, they're not really the user of the product, right? And so that can be the case. And so then you're having to stay in touch and communicate the value that they're achieving, and hope that it is not only matches to what their expectations were, but in our quickly changing, tech and business environments, um, not just what they needed when they first bought it from you, but what do they need now? Because that can very much change. But then also sometimes you end up in a conversation with procurement, and procurement doesn't have those same goals at all. They don't care, right? They're trying to make certain they can get the best deal possible, even if that isn't really the deal that's going to best serve the company sometimes, right? And so you have to, then you're also having several different conversations with different types of stakeholders then. Or these days too, there can be third party procurement, right? In third party procurement, sometimes then we'll be negotiating, savings or some sort of bonus or deal or something like that, just to say, look what I got you. Something that even the customer didn't ask for, didn't want, didn't need, but they just want to show I'm bringing value. Right. So that can be, also part of the challenge. So part of it is understanding, did the customer achieve the things that they set out to? Have those goals changed? All of those things, and staying in touch with them throughout that period, between, the different selling points, right? So you know what you're walking into, and getting them prepared for that. But then also thinking about who are all the different stakeholders involved in order to successfully sell in this post-sales motion, because then that can also be very different.
And so earning the right to sell, in my understanding, is really about the orientation that we have. Do we have an orientation toward understanding the customer's goals, their desired outcomes, where they're trying to head as a business or maybe even personally, and really being on their side? It's like developing trust, right?
Yeah, it's also, though, because when you take a look at all of the stages and check boxes in for the initial sale that they have leading through that. I think sometimes most times we do not do the same in that post sales motion when we are then trying to do a renewal sale or an expansion sale. We're not thinking about the stages and the check boxes that lead up to that conversation. And then also thinking about multi-threading and who all is involved in that multi-threading, right? And so all of these things are identified, sort of ad nauseum, like very, very detailed for that initial sale. And then they're like, oh, yeah, well, we did it. We're done.
Yeah. Yeah.
All good now. And in fact, no, this is where your work begins now, because the company your company, in order to get to that hockey stick growth, right? If you're going to get to that hockey stick growth, you gotta do that renewal process several times over with the customer. You need to do expansion sales with them several times over, not just the one and done. And these things are not automatic. I think a lot of times it's like, well, of course they want to adopt our product. It's a great product and they bought it. They saw that, they bought it, done. And it's like, no, 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 no. Well, first of all, there's loads of change management that goes into all of that to get them to adopt it. And then there's more change management to get them to optimize. They have to change how they do it, right? Essentially, almost even physically, right? In a sense.
Well, so this is an important point, and I just want to drill in a little bit on what you were saying about the sales process versus the renewals process, and this happens all the time. Okay, so we talk to a CRO, or even better, you talk to like the VP of sales or SVP of sales, and you say, how do you qualify? How do you do your sales process? And they have this list of like 25 things they do, and they use Medic or MedPick or this thing or that thing, and they've got all this stuff in their CRM, and it's like this really well-oiled machine. Hopefully, it's just the kind of really
For the one
prescriptive
thing
process.
it's going well, yeah, they've got it dialed.
They've got it down.
Yeah.
And then you go to the VP of account management or SVP or whatever, and you say, how do you do renewals? And they're like, oh, well, and like there's almost no process, there's almost no discipline. And
or they'll say 6 months before you start to do some reach out, that sort of thing. And it's like, well, okay, so that's the actual sales conversation, how you're leading up to that. But when you think about all of the conversion, right, that is being looked at from in the marketing process all the way through the sales process, just to get to that one sale, right, the initial sale, there's a lot of conversion points that they're looking at.
oh, yeah.
Right. And there's no money exchange there. But then all of a sudden you get to the post sales motion, and all they're looking at for conversion rates is renewals or expansions. That's it. It's like, what happened to all of the conversion activities that need to happen that lead up to that? Right.
Okay. Yeah. Tell us more about what else we should be tracking there.
Well, I mean, so when you think about onboarding, all they're really looking at as a metric is time to first value. Well, okay, that is definitely a good metric to look at, but you should know all the different kinds of things you need that the customer needs to do and who needs to be involved, and have you set it up, and are they doing things in the time that is going to make them most successful, right? And sometimes customers will push back and say, we absolutely cannot onboard right now. We have to delay it a month. And they have all these great reasons. That doesn't make them, just because they asked for that delay, doesn't mean that they aren't a red account. They're still a red account. Yeah. Because when they get, to where 6 months later and they still haven't onboarded, they're still going to either churn, or they're going to ask.
It's still your fault. It's still your fault. Yeah.
Yeah. They're still going to, want the money back or churn because they didn't use the product, even if it was their decision. Right. So there's that. So you need to think about, like, what are all the things that go through in that process? Then when you think about, do they know they've launched? Right. Because if they don't know that they've launched, then what they're doing is just a bunch of onboarding work, and now a bunch of adoption work, and then just more work in the product. And it's just work, 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 work. And I compare that to an American football game where you are chasing after the ball, right? and you're beating each other up. And if you have a goal that you've achieved and you have a change in the score and you're doing the end zone dance, everybody's good. And you even have all these people, spectating and cheering you on, right? But if you don't have that change in the score and you don't have that end zone dance, all you're doing for a few hours is beating each other up and chasing after a little ball, right? Not
Right.
nearly as interesting, doesn't feel as good.
Uh-huh.
And so if they don't know that they've launched and they're just going from all this drudgery work to more drudgery work, right? Because the change management involved in changing everything you do to adopt, that is hard work. You have to think really hard, right? And to change what you are used to doing, no matter what it is. So all of that stuff, like you need to be tracking what does a successful account look like, and are they doing it, and like how much time, what is involved, because every product's different, every customer base is different, in terms of what should be involved and who should be involved and blah, blah, blah. So you need to know it for your own company, for your own products, for your own customer base. And what are those things that you should be measuring? And are they moving along the way they should? And there are a lot of like tools out there that are using AI and things like that that can help you with that, right? Same with like the sentiment, understanding the sentiment. If you have a lot of different touch points with your customers, right, there are ways in which you can, get that, all of that analysis together, and you should, right? So you need to know, like, where are they tracking, and are they tracking in the way that they should be? And use whatever tools you can to help you get there. But then from that, what you should be building in your process is, what are some of the key things that need to happen at key moments, right? In order to track to, I know that they're in a good pace for a renewal. Doesn't mean it's perfect, because you also need to be multi-threaded. You also need to know what the deal terms are. You also, all those other things, right? And then, that's when I think we were preparing for this conversation, we were getting into, one of my favorite books lately is The Expansion Sale, right?
Yeah.
And some of those conversations, whether you're doing price increases or renewals or, expansion and all those things, right?
Yeah, I
But,
just had Tim Reister, the author of this expansion sale, on the podcast, and what we were talking about was how different the conversation is when you're doing a new sale versus when you're doing
yes,
a renewal sale, or whatever, with the existing customer. And
yeah,
the main thing is how different the mindsets are. So the mindset
yes,
in the new business is, I am here to disrupt the status quo and to show you a
yes,
better way of doing things.
yeah,
In the expansion sale, according to Tim, the
yeah,
idea is, I am the status quo. So I'm not
yes.
here to disrupt
You gotta,
anything.
why
What I
stay?
want to do instead is celebrate how far we've come and paint a roadmap for how things are going to get even better in the future.
And so that's where it comes to the celebrate, right? Where you need to understand what they were trying to achieve. Did they achieve it? Score change, end zone dance. You've got to do those things along the way, because otherwise, if you get to a year later, oh, hi, I'm just showing up, I'm going to do a renewal conversation with you. Hey, look at all these things you achieved. And this is the first they're hearing of it. They're not really sold on that. Like, sure, you're telling me. Look, Loom all the time tells me how many meetings I've saved using their video, right? But that's not how I use it. So I don't save any meeting time with the way that I'm using Loom. So that doesn't resonate with me. That's not why I'm using it, right? So if you show up at that meeting and you haven't set the stage and you haven't already gotten to a place where it's like for a while, I was focused on education policy. And one of the things that happens is, anytime a bill goes to the floor to vote, they already know what the votes are going to be, right? They already know if it's going to pass or fail, right? That's how you need to walk into your sales conversation, whether that's a renewal or expansion. You should have a very good idea when you're getting to that point where you're negotiating the contract and those kinds of things. What are the things that are contentious for them? What are they going to easily agree to? What is their BATNA? All those kinds of things. What is your BATNA? All of those things, so that you know where you already want to take it. Like when I've coached, whether on my team, like the ICs or other leaders, it's always like, how are you setting up your slides? What sort of story is it going to tell? How do you set up the different options? Here's option A, where I really want you to go. Here's option C, which is at the minimum, kind of where I want you to go. And here's an option B that you're going to feel like is Goldilocks and has more advantages to me. It's like the reason why you shouldn't buy the wine on the menu that is the second least expensive, because that's actually the one that they make their most money off of, on a restaurant menu.
So what when I hear you talking about that, it reminds me of something I've said a lot, which is we totally overcomplicate the role of account managers in most companies. And you ask an account manager what they do, and they give you a list of all these things that they're doing on like their activities, right, on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And in reality, and in my construction at least, the account manager has three jobs: keep the customer, grow the customer, and third, no surprises. So that's to your point of you should already know which way this is heading, right? And by the
Yeah,
way,
yeah.
if it's heading down, then we need to put in whatever mitigation plans and do all the things that we need to. But we need to know ahead of time. If you walk into a
Yeah,
renewal or
you
you're getting
shouldn't be
close to
on
renewal,
surprise.
you get hit with a surprise. You are not doing your job as an account manager.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and so what sort of tools do you have at your disposal to help you with that? Because the other thing that happens too is you're given so many, like I know someone who is at a very large company. All she does is renewals and expansion negotiations, right? There's a separate CSM team that is doing, all of the other work. And so literally, she is trying to gather that information ahead of time in terms of how those conversations are going to go. But she doesn't have all of those other things that you're talking about, right? She's just doing the negotiations. So that can vary. But then the problem is then you still need to ensure that what's being set up in those conversations, that you have teams that are doing all of those things, right? And you do need to know what are the key activities that are going to lead you there. What are those conversion points that are going to lead you to that successful conversation? Because if you're spending a bunch of time doing things that are busy work as opposed to strategic work, then you're not setting yourself or the customer up for that successful conversation for the renewal.
So
And
what does that? So what does that actually mean? We hear this all the time, right? The advice to account managers: be more strategic, be less
yeah,
tactical.
yeah, yeah, sure.
Like so. I mean, it's one thing for people to say that. It's another thing for the account manager who's like, "Hey, I got a customer who's upset about this, or they have this question, this thing, this thing." Like, I want to be responsive. I want to do the right thing for them. How do I take this advice about be strategic and actually put it into action?
It's interesting because I lead a community CX exchange, and we have weekly success hours. And next week, we're going to have a session where we're talking about support and how support can be both responsive and strategic, right? And when you think about it, when you have a customer calling you or emailing you, and for them the world is on fire, right? And so you want to be responsive, right? But there's a difference between being reactive and being responsive. And seeing responsive is then not only dealing with the issue at hand that is before you, but also looking beyond that and how does it connect. So when I back when I was in IC, I had a customer who basically could get started on sort of a rant and go down sort of this spiral. And if you let them continue going down that spiral, then the world was not a good place. Everything was on fire. You would never recover from it, that sort of thing, right? And so it's always important then, because the account manager role, any commercial role needs to be very strategically focused on impact and outcomes, right? And when you're working with the customer and they start to say, oh, but we should have this feature and that feature. Oh, but this doesn't work and that doesn't work. The best way to address that is say, can you tell me about the business impact? Can you tell me about how this is impacting the work you're trying to get done, how this impacts your business. And when you get them talking about that, oftentimes, if it's not that strategic of an issue, if it's not that important, the customer will start to talk themselves out of it. And you don't have to, because they do. They start to say, oh, yeah, well, that doesn't really matter. It just bugs me. I just really wish that button was blue. I like blue. Blue's my favorite color. It's like, okay, but it doesn't have a business impact, it being blue. Whereas other times you'll hear, well, the reason why I wanted that button blue is because everyone else is colorblind on the team. They can only see blue. And because it's not blue, they don't see it. So now it misses, and we can never do our close at the end of the month because they never hit that blue button the way they ought to. Now you have something you can take back. Now you have to say, this is the business impact, right? And now, however product goes to fix that issue, at least now you know that there was business impact for it, right? And so that's part of it, though. If you know what your conversion points are that you should be leading your customer to, and then they start taking you on a tangent, you either find out what is the business impact of that tangent, and does it need to be addressed so I can get them back on track? Or if there is no business impact, hey, that's a tangent. But guess what? I've got this great thing for you over here. This is going to lead us to success. Then we're going to do our little end zone dance together. Everyone feels good when we do that together. Let's get back on track and do that together. And if you're not guiding that relationship, then that's where you're not being strategic. That's where you're being reactive instead of proactive. So that's why it's so important to know what those conversion points, what's actually critical to be doing at these different stages with the customer in their life cycle that's going to lead them to that success. It's going to lead to the either the renewal sale or the expansion sale.
So let's take a different approach to this. I want to have a different lens on a similar challenge, which is a lot of account management teams. They live in this really weird gray zone where nobody inside the company actually knows what they do, and so like they literally, like, they don't know. People don't know what this role does, even though in many cases they're generating 70 or 80% of the company's revenue. Right? It's coming through that. It's coming through that team. And so in many ways, they're missing that proverbial seat at the table, right? Or they're not getting that seat at the table. How do you recommend that account management leaders and teams make sure that people do understand what they do, speak in the language of business, and earn that seat at the table?
Yeah. Well, and this is where I focus my coaching practice, and I'm building a course specifically about this, right? So the two things you've got me on, the two things I'm most passionate about. But So part of it is what will happen from an early stage startup that then goes awry and stays awry in companies as they mature is sort of that gap filler role. And so they never finish building out that part of the product. And so instead, it's humans that do this gap filling. Or the reports, yeah, they should, build it out so, customers can do their own reports, that sort of thing. But, how often do they need that one specific report? Just email it to them, run it yourself, and email it to them when they're doing it, that sort of thing. So first of all, there tends to be then, if the leader doesn't understand what those conversion points are, what sort of revenue they're trying to drive, and all of those things, and if the leader doesn't push back on all those sort of other gap filler or reactive, things that otherwise it's so easy to do as an individual contributor, then 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 the leader is doing a disservice, not just to the team, not just to the customers, but also to the company, because then everyone's getting off track and not getting to the business goals and revenue that they need to, right? So that's one thing. So the leader needs to step up and identify those things. But it's also not it's not enough to just know the function area that you have. So you can be excellent at account management and that post-sales motion, or I don't actually like calling it post sales because there's selling throughout the journey. But after the initial sale, the rest of the customer journey. Um, so it, it you need to be able to understand how to translate what you're doing into business terms and that language of business, and connect it to your business goals. When you do that, it helps you to understand sort of that language of business. Then you can translate to your own customers how you're impacting their business. But then ultimately you need to be able to understand and translate how you're impacting the business. And you're able to then, step up to that executive level and communicate with the other executives on the team. But then you're able to represent what you're doing to the board as well. And that's how you get the seat at the executive table,
Yep.
not just by having those blinders on and saying, here's my function, I do my function really well, but it's about stepping up as a business leader, understanding your impact as a business leader, and communicating it in that business language.
Yeah, and being comfortable with the language of metrics and finance and revenue. I was talking to Jay Nathan on an earlier episode of this podcast about this. And one of the things that I've noticed is if you say to an account manager, how big's your portfolio? They might say it's 20 accounts. Okay, what if instead you said it's $2.5 million? And instead of saying, hey, I just renewed, 6 customers this quarter, instead you said, I grew revenue by 132% this quarter. Like those kind of things, just simply those shifts make a big difference in how you are perceived. And when people understand the value, right, the stickiness that happens when you do have a great account manager, the opportunity for upsell, the opportunity to now have an early warning system, when they understand that, they value it. But if you're out there kind of, just doing your own thing without telling anybody, without speaking the language of finance that the rest of the company cares about, it's no wonder that people turn around and like, hey, who is this person? What are they doing for me?
Right. Well, yeah, and so it's really connecting then that your function to the business. So yes, you do need to understand that language of business, but it's also how do you and your function and your team, how do you impact it?
Yeah.
Right? And so it's connecting those dots that then they understand what you do, because it's not just this dollar amount. Because the other thing too that can happen is look at what I've done, and they're like, oh, yeah, yeah. Well, that's great. Can you just go and get double that then? Can
Right.
you just go get some more? And so it's part of then being able to explain how, what you're doing, how you're doing it, and then how it has that impact, right? So that then too, when you're speaking to product and engineering about that impact, right, then they get on board because they understand how they're impacting customers, how that in turn impacts your business, right? And that's when they're talking about, whether, to be customer centric. And it's like, oh, every company says, oh, we're customer centric. But, or if you're talking about it in terms of like customer success, it's like, and when they talk about, everybody is literally a part of customer success. And then people get upset and they say, well, if everyone's responsible for the customer success, then no one's responsible
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, well, yes, there is going to be a team that needs to be thinking specifically about if their customers are achieving, and if they are going to renew, and if they're going to expand, certainly. But beyond that, everyone needs to understand their role and how they contribute to the customer having success. And that, unfortunately, is something that we have to translate as leaders, because we're the ones who are working with the customers. So whether you're in account management or CS, we're working with the customers. We have that insight on that voice of the customer, and it's up to us to then translate it back. Now, product used to be more involved in voice of the customer. One day they might get more involved in the customer again. I don't know, but they've started to look more inward than outward, right? And so I think one day we will all be looking more towards our customers and how we interact to bring back that voice of the customer. And I think that's ultimately where we all should be going. But for now, in the post sales motion, we're the ones who've got it. We're the ones who are taking that torch of that voice of the customer. But then it's important. We got to translate it back. We got to help marketing understand who the most successful customers are, which ones are going to be more likely to renew and expand, and how they should be going out and helping to identify those customers out in the marketplace, right? And all of the different ways in which we help connect the dots across that executive team and speak in the language that is the language of business.
That's a very helpful primer to understand the role, to speak in the language, to help people connect the dots. Because as account managers, we're going to see a lot more customer facing stuff than pretty much anyone else inside the company, and we have to relay that information back, and we have to make very clear what we're learning. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Jen, any last thoughts on earning the right to sell or how we navigate that process?
Well, I guess what I would just say is that it's through that voice of the customer, through understanding kind of what the business impact is and those things, just there is that dollar amount. And so connecting the financials, but also being sure to connect it to um, those conversion points that led to it, so that everyone can get on board with in the same way with product led growth. When you think about, well, how can I shorten that period or get more conversion points, then you want to think about that too in the post sales motion, right? Where you say, okay, so how could we get more people successfully renewing or expanding, and what is involved in that? And sometimes that means building out parts of the product. It isn't about adding to your team. Sometimes it's about bringing in tools that can analyze data. Sometimes it's about cleaning up your data so that you have data that can be analyzed, right? So it's not just the answers aren't all within your team, but you have this amazing window, right? From the customer and from the company. You're at this intersection. And because of that, if you step up to that executive level where you can translate all of these things into the dollars and to the business impact, then we can all participate in the ways that we can best to make that happen. So it's a great opportunity.
Fantastic. It is a great opportunity indeed. And thanks so much for coming on and sharing your thoughts here. The idea of getting this right is so important to account managers. We want to get out there and have an impact. We want to show our progress. We want to be that true trusted advisor, both to our customers and inside of our company. And Jan Young, really appreciate you being here and sharing your insights with us.
Well, I'm excited that you're doing this and you're building a community and the podcast. And so thank you, Alex. Really appreciate it.